Tonight on Nova, at the end of the war, the Iraqis retreat, leaving Kuwait in flames. With countless oil fires burning out of control, firefighters from the U.S. and around the world face the ultimate challenge. Equipment is scarce, organization poor, and it is up to them to save Kuwait and the world from environmental catastrophe. The new front lines are manned by the Hellfighters of Kuwait.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Lockheed, a bold new force in systems engineering, management, and technology services for defense, space, and industry. And Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.
A year ago, the armies of the United States and 7 other countries massed in the Arabian Gulf, preparing to free Kuwait from the occupying army of Iraq. Oil was a key factor in the conflict. And in the months before the fighting began, the risks of environmental disaster were obvious, as deadly oil slicks spread down the Gulf. When the shooting started, the most sophisticated weapons the world had ever seen quickly devastated the Iraqi forces. But Saddam Hussein resorted to an older weapon of his own, a scorched earth policy, to deny the Allies the fruits of their victory. In the hours before Baghdad surrendered, the oil wells of Kuwait were set ablaze by Saddam's retreating army. Over 700 wells were destroyed by explosives, and the black gold of the desert now fueled an inferno. Liberated Kuwait was in flames. The Allied armies advanced into a country engulfed by fire and choking black smoke, and everywhere, the carnage of war. There are 6 major oil fields in Kuwait: Ahmadi, Burgan, Wafra, Managish, Rawdatain, Sabriya. Before the Iraqi invasion, more than 900 wells produced crude oil worth more than $50 million a day, $12 billion a year. Kuwait's oil reserves are the 3rd largest in the world. And And this prize that soldiers had fought and died for was now going up in flames.
Oil is a basic ingredient for the Western economies, which cannot be denied. In the absence of a true economical alternative, oil will remain for the next 30 to 40 years, as is projected. So oil did play a large part in deciding. Let's assume the other side of the coin. Had we been just a plain desert or a bunch of Bedouins roaming the desert, do you think the West would have interfered? Oil. Always the issue of oil.
The United States had led the coalition to free Kuwait. Now the Army Corps of Engineers mobilized the resources to put out the fires that were costing nearly $350 million a week in lost revenues and threatening an environmental catastrophe. The massive task began. At airfields across North America, the Strategic Air Command filled giant cargo planes with men and equipment bound for the oil fires of Kuwait. The firefighting know-how of the oil industry faced its toughest test ever. It was not unexpected. Before the fighting started, the Kuwait Oil Company approached companies in the United States, asking them to prepare plans to deal with a large number of oil fires. Though nobody had foreseen the scale of the problem.
Some of the people who were here got out of the country, and they told us that there were explosives on these wells. We knew there were about 100 at that point that had been basically mined, and out of that we figured that it would be about 70 or so of them that would require repair. We began to plan for the equipment that would be needed for each blowout control team. And by the time the shooting quit, we were ready to move.
Just can't wait to get on the road again. Well, I my love is waiting, sister, my friend, and I can't wait to get on the road again.
Never before had the world seen entire oil fields set ablaze. There were fears the task would be beyond the means of the 4 firefighting companies that had been selected to fight the Kuwait fires. There were 3 Texas-based companies, Red Adair, Boots and Coots, and Wild Well Control, and 1 Canadian company, Safety Boss. Each company had 2 teams of firefighters, each team made up of 4 well control specialists and 3 mechanics. Just 58 men to deal with more than 700 blazing wells. Until now, the most fires they'd ever faced at one time was 5. Arriving in Kuwait, they set to work, trying to establish some order out of the chaos they'd landed in. Nervous of mines and unexploded munitions, already realizing that their experience was the only thing going for them.
First thing you have to worry about is getting your mind back in organization. It's unbelievable, all of the things that you see here. You start out on a project like this, the way they've worked it here is each one of the 4 major firefighting teams has been given a sector to work on the wells in that given sector. Beforehand, if equipment's not here, you have to organize that, get it coming. Some of the equipment we build here ourselves. Equipment has to arrive, has to be assembled, has to be tested. Once all of that is in order, then you can move out on your first well and begin your operation.
For all of the support services and those people that were sent to be assistants and laborers and helpers, right down to a dump truck driver. When you throw him in the situation of darkness and a loud roar, the ground is vibrating, and they do not understand technically what's taking place. So fear sets in. But as soon as you make them comfortable with the fact that the well is doing all that it can do, it doesn't present any further danger to them, it comes along rather quickly after that.
I couldn't work on the assembly line in the factory. I'd go bonkers, you know, but, you know, we go to different countries, we see different cultures and everything, and different wells, and each one of them is different, so you have to not only know the basics, but be able to improvise to meet whatever needs are necessary at that time.
We had to make do with very little equipment, and we put out some of the smaller fires, the fires that were blowing straight up that we could put out with a small amount of water, which is 1,000 barrels is what we were working with out of tanks, and they were hauling the tanks from one job to the next.
While the firefighters prepared for their awesome challenge, the fears of what effect the fires might have grew more alarming and pessimistic. There was talk of irreversible global pollution, of the Asian monsoons being disrupted and harvests ruined, of vast regions overtaken by darkness and contamination by the dense black smoke churning out from a nation on fire. Headlines carried the warnings of scientists. If the smoke rose high enough to reach the stratosphere, it could cause climatic changes in countries as far away as India and other parts of Asia. The pollution from 6 million barrels of oil a day was pouring into the atmosphere, and the wind and rain would quickly transport this around the world. In Kuwait, immense columns of foul smoke belched into the sky as the hellfires roared. Whatever happened would rest on the firefighters' efforts. They were the spearhead of what was intended to become a huge task force. Over 1,000 support workers backed by millions of dollars worth of essential equipment. All of it brought together in the town of Ahmadi, in the middle of the oil fields, the home of the Kuwait Oil Company. After the months of military activity, American Forces Radio now had a quickly growing civilian audience. At times, it seemed as if Kuwait had become an outpost of Texas. There had been advanced planning, but now it looked inadequate. Early forecasts said it would take years to extinguish the flames, even with the best technology. And though some equipment was already in Ahmadi, from the beginning there would be a serious shortage that would hinder the fire crews. The political vacuum in Kuwait would compound the problem and create growing headaches for the firefighters. The Emir of Kuwait and most of the government had fled the country, and the devastation that came with the Iraqi invasion had left Kuwait an empty shell. Offices and homes had been stripped of furniture and equipment. Technical records and files had been ransacked and burned. Kuwait had been gutted. Even in June, 3 months after the war ended, Kuwait City itself was a ghost town, windblown like the desert from which it sprang. The telephone system was almost useless, electricity and fresh water only just restored. 50,000 vehicles had been destroyed, the local economy was in ruins. The return of the Emir did not solve the lack of leadership. Martial law remained, and government all but ceased. Political paralysis led to endless wrangling over who would receive the vast sums of money paid as commission to import the equipment that the firefighters desperately needed.
In Kuwait, With the infrastructure completely destroyed, everything had to come in. So the organization problem was one of procuring material, getting to the right place at the right time, and acquiring those services that normally are available, such as water trucks, pump trucks, transportation. All of those things have to be coordinated, and therein lies the problem that we had. Getting contracts written was terrible. That everybody wanted to get their hand on them, and they ended up with 35 signatures. Seriously. And all of a sudden we find purchasing agents who, when they look at bulldozers, they say, I can't imagine they need bulldozers. Scratch them. They haven't the slightest idea of what they're doing.
In the short term, they're saying we're losing $120 million a day, but at the same time, they're haggling with the contractors over the $10,000 or $20,000 equipments. And we know for sure that they had the advice that these oil wells were up to go in flames around in October 1990, but no contract was signed till end of February 1991.
We didn't get any equipment until sometime late March and April was the first thing we saw come in here to work with.
The firefighters had to confront technical problems that were also different from their past experience. The oil lay 2 miles under the desert sands and flowed under great pressure up the well to the surface. There, a large metal structure called a wellhead controlled the flow of oil from the well. The Iraqi troops had placed high explosives on these wellheads. When they were detonated, oil and fire spurted in different directions, depending on how the wellhead had been split and twisted by the blast. The giant fires that roared and burned across Kuwait were permanently fueled by the high pressure flow of oil from far underground. The problems this caused was demonstrated by well 120. This giant fire straddled the road into Ahmadi, its huge flame towering over the blackened landscape. A Red Adair team had been working on 120 for over a week with no success. Even under the best conditions, 120 would be hell itself to put out.
It's one of the larger ones that we've dealt with in this particular field. I was told it's capable of 10,000 barrels per day to a very small choke. So, you know, anyone's guess, maybe making 20,000, 30,000, nobody knows. At one point I put an explosive in there, but at that time I couldn't even see the wellhead. And I managed to remove some more of the debris and we call it coke buildup. It's the unburnt oil that solidifies. The main problem is that the fire's going two horizontal and one vertical. Like you can see now in the background there, with the wind blowing, it rolls the one back over the wellhead so that you can't. It's almost impossible to extinguish one when they're blowing like that.
Many wells had been ablaze for months. The damaged wellheads were clogged by a thick sludge of unburnt oil residues and sand. The teams used a specially built crane jib to rake away some of this sludge and coke. The heat from the fires is enough to melt steel, up to 2,000 or 3,000 degrees at the center. Water is poured onto the flames to cool the furnace-like air around the wellhead and give the teams a chance to get in closer and assess the damage. The work goes on for days, until the team decides to loosen up the remainder of the debris with a charge of dynamite. Explosives enough to make a medium-sized bomb are packed into an oil drum and carefully primed. It's a delicate, highly dangerous operation.
Explosive is nothing more than an expedient tool. And in wall control, we use it quite a bit, and it speeds up the job and then cuts down the time we spend on each blowout, and that's to the customer's satisfaction.
200 or 300 pounds of dynamite, wrapped in asbestos, are carefully placed in the heart of the fire. The asbestos must withstand a temperature of 2,000 degrees, and a suppressed tension affects everyone on the site. The massive explosion blows away tons of rubble and coke. No matter how experienced they are, the risks to the firefighters are always there.
Well, it only takes one mistake. I'm sure everybody's a little apprehensive at times, but we set it down, and it's not a wham-bam, thank-you-ma'am job. It's very thought out, very thorough. Should there be an accident, what we're going to do at that time and everything. Of course, you could have a dress rehearsal. The coke's still laying on top, but we loosen it up, and that's what we intended to do. Yeah. So we can rake it back out.
The explosive we've used was to loosen that coke pile around this wellhead to help us so we can dig that coke out and see the wellhead and expose it so we know what we have to do from that point on.
When all the debris has been cleared, then the damage to the wellhead and the best way to remove it can be assessed. Often, another explosion will be used to cut away the wellhead from its casing.
Cutting casings and everything, that's a very exact science, and we know precisely the depth of cut we can get from each size charge, and we know what size casings we're going to cut, and we use the appropriate explosive.
Only after this is done will they think about extinguishing the flames. It's the end of June and a mid-afternoon in Kuwait. Over 100 oil fires have been put out, but a surreal darkness blankets the city. When winds carry soot and oily smoke from the southern oil fields, the eerie blackness dispels any optimism that the firefighters are winning their dangerous battle. Next day is as black as deepest night, lit only by the lurid glare of the oil fires. Headlights are useless, unable to penetrate the oily soot hanging in the air. On days like this, work grinds to a halt, except for maintenance jobs in the machine shops and pipe yards. The inactivity sharpens criticism that the firefighters are moving too slowly.
I've heard too much criticism, I'm up to here with it. And it's like having one bicycle and 10 people trying to ride it. You get too many people, you're not going to get anything done. And the people, you got the best in the world doing it here. And as far as that, we got enough people. The thing we need is more equipment.
The Gulf War may be over, but but Saddam Hussein's grim legacy is still clear to see. The country has been consumed by fire. The smashed wells spew forth millions of gallons of oil in a fine spray, hundreds of feet into the air. It covers the landscape, coloring everything a dirty black and brown. In the desert, this black rain has created swamps, oil lakes, and islands. Foul terrain that now forms the backdrop to the unrelenting work of the fire crews as they move deeper into the oil fields to the south and west of Ahmadi. Dynamite is used more and more to clear away debris around the wellheads. The dull thud of explosions is now a constant sound as the size of the explosive charges increase daily, and they are used to extinguish the fires themselves.
Snuffing the fire, no, that's a kind of a by guess and by God type of thing. You know, just through experience, we know that it might take 100 pounds or it might take 500.
We used 250 on this one here just to make a bigger boom. That one, when we shot it yesterday, it didn't seem like it was that much concussion. We were upwind, but I think we used 250 on this one here. You want to go with enough, so you just do it one time. Because after you shoot it, you tear up your monitor stands and you tear up some aluminum pipe and blow all of the tin off of your dozer and everything. So naturally, you'll want to get it right the first time.
In an instant, the massive blast snuffs out the flame. And where there was fire, now there is oil.
One thing that has concerned us, and when we shot this well out here, it was a big fire. When we shot it out the day before, we wanted to shoot it, but there was a sandstorm. And we put 200 pounds of explosives in the shot drum, and you don't want your head down that drum with all the static electricity around. That's pretty dangerous.
But the real danger comes when the fires are blown out.
The fire is the lesser of the evil. There's nothing to that. I mean, a troop of Brownie Scouts can put that fire out. It's the rest of it that counts.
And that's the more dangerous part of working on one. When you're up there removing that old wellhead and there's oil spray going everywhere, if it should ignite at that time, you'd have some people burned.
In fact, that happened here just a few days ago. And 3 guys got burned. Not seriously, thank God, but not with our team, obviously, either.
In the oil firefighting business, every well is unique, and there are no hard and fast rules. Here at Ahmadi number 7, the fire was easily put out with water. Now they need to deal with the oil itself, surging up to the surface with the speed of a jet engine. To cool the remains of the wellhead, 4,000 gallons of seawater a minute are pumped through high-pressure hoses. The oil itself has been burning at temperatures above 3,000 degrees. The ground remains hot enough to boil water for days afterwards. And the abiding fear is always of a sudden lethal explosion of the volatile mixture of gas and oil. This uncontrolled high-pressure flow of oil is called a blowout. The firefighting teams must now interrupt the flow and cap the well, the most dangerous and the most exhausting stage of blowout control. At any one time, 3 or 4 wells are being capped. Some are far tougher than others. First, A giant valve called a blowout preventer has to be secured over the damaged oil pipe before the gusher can be stopped. The blast of escaping oil is deafening. The stinging mist of oil and gas covers the body, clogging eyes and invading the ears and lungs. The heavy blowout preventer must be guided by hand to sit exactly over the well pipe to form an unbroken seal. It is an operation that demands a mixture of brute force and delicate manipulation. In the end, success depends on the efforts and know-how of men like these. Once the blowout preventer has been worked into place, hydraulic power lines are connected. The oil flow is then closed off. Dense drilling mud is pumped down the well, stopping the flow of oil, allowing the well to be capped.
John Wayne made a movie in 1968 called Hellfighters that, kind of glamorized the business. Believe me, it's not that glamorous.
Indeed, glamour is not a word that springs readily to mind. With the job comes a 12-hour day, 7 days a week for a month, in temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
We want to move all these trucks right here. Go down the road and set up the block.
At the end of an exhausting day, there's only enough time to eat and tell a few jokes before grabbing some sleep in the Ahmadi guest house.
In West Texas one time there was a small independent oil company that had a catastrophe like you see here on these individual wells, but they didn't have enough money to afford the well control teams that existed at the time, so they hired a small outfit for a low rate. The day they were supposed to show up, the company drilling foreman was up on the bluff watching that road across the desert for hours and hours and hours, and these guys were already 3 hours late. Finally, he stationed one of the other crew members up there. He says, I'm going to go try to call this guy, so you watch, and if you see him coming, you let me know. Well, about an hour went by, and this hand came running up there, and he said, I think they're coming. I see a dust cloud across the desert there. The company hand goes up. Sure enough, here comes this 18-foot stake bed truck. 100 people hanging out of there, all with a burlap bag, and they run up to that well and ran right into it. Truck crashed into the well. They all jumped out and beat out the fire with their burlap bags. When it was all over, the oil company representative handed this fella the check. He said, what's the first thing you're going to do with all this money? He said, I think we better fix the brakes on the truck.
The summer temperatures are pushing ever higher, and the seasonal Shamal wind is whipping up the sand. Hot sandstorms are blowing off the desert at over 60 miles an hour, blotting out visibility and making work impossible. In the oil fields, the firefighters are still complaining about shortages of equipment. The easiest fires were tackled first. They were capped at the rate of 1 a day. Now it's fallen to 1 a week. Some wells, like 120, are taking far longer. The twisted wellhead has defied every effort to remove it. Now Raymond has rigged a steel cable, dragging it back and forth as a makeshift saw to cut off the wellhead.
It's been cutting a little over 40 hours now, and it possibly will cut off late this afternoon. It could cut off within the hour. Or if not, it'll be tomorrow, And should within 1 to 2 days after it's cut off, we'll have it capped.
But the days pass and the cable is making little headway. Elsewhere in the oil field, other problems are slowing down the firefighting effort.
The well that Ace is working on now has a lot of ground fire, and that's time consuming. Putting out this probably the size of 6 or 8 football fields of ground fire there, and they have to extinguish that first, and that takes time.
Many of the wells were gushing thick oil that never totally caught fire. It spread over the sand, creating a thick layer of tar, burning fitfully and producing dense, choking clouds of smoke that obscured any sight of the burning well. The easiest fires were in the Ahmadi field, but during July and August, attention turned to Bergan, the largest oil field in Kuwait and one of the most congested in the world. Individual wells are so close together that several fires will have to be put out at one time. Bergan is going to be the most dangerous field the firefighters have to face.
I'm going to pull down and show you this other well as we pass this. You'll be able to see what I'm talking about, or what you mentioned, locations close together. Wind will be very, very critical when we start this work. And the reason for it, the wind's out of the northwest at the present time and stays there. And that particular well over there won't bother us. But you take this well right here, it'll have to be extinguished before we can do this one. Because if the wind changes and blows the oil that way, it'll reignite. As you can see, it gets darker and darker into South Bergan. And if we could go, which we can't, about 2 more miles, it is a total blackout. I've been in there with a helicopter a couple of times, and in fact, we got lost in there in the helicopter and just had to come out on instruments. That's how dark it is. You can see them burning in the smoke. So it's a mess. This country will never be the same down in this part of the area. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it'll be wrecked for years to come. You can see the problem we're going to have with some of these wells out in the lakes of oil. Now they're going to have to build roads to them, just like an island, and work on them. You can see we're going to come to the end of the road. They won't let anyone really go too much farther south.
By early July, 170 wells have been capped, but still no one knows how many were on fire to begin with and how many continue to blaze.
We've been told 600, then we've been told 500, we've been told 700. I don't think anyone really knows what, the number of wells.
Yeah, somewhere now, somewhere between 450 and 550. And that, because we really don't know exactly how many they are, were originally.
Well, the report we got yesterday was 732 wells on fire. There was, I think, 80 of them blowing out. That of yesterday, there's been 168 wells brought under control.
The figure of over 700 blazing wells is 200 more than anyone had previously admitted. After 4 months of work, hundreds of wells were still gushing fire and acrid smoke. And with vital equipment still not arriving, the experts were saying the fires would be burning for months, even years.
Assuming we get a reasonable increase in the amount of equipment we have to work with, we can be done in a year from now, or less perhaps. We don't have any more than we have right now. 2 years.
Well 120 again. Raymond tries a new method to deal with the wellhead. This time, a large pipe is lowered over the flames. The idea is to funnel the gushing oil up the pipe like a chimney. If this works, the flame will be raised higher and water can be pumped into the base and the flame snuffed out. Then, hopefully, they can finally remove the wellhead. But after an hour, the water supply is running out, and the fire is still as fierce as ever. The firefighters call it a day, and well 120 goes on burning.
Just one more well. I was telling you earlier, it's kind of hard to get excited when you know you've got another 300 or 400 to go.
While the battle to beat the fires is waged, there's continuing concern about the environmental impact of the burning oil fields. William Riley, head of the Environmental Protection Agency, pays a lightning visit to Kuwait in the run-up to congressional hearings about the global repercussions of the fires. He stops off at well 120 together with what is left of Kuwait's foreign press.
I'm here to get a sense for the President of the condition of the environment, the kinds of environmental needs that exist, what we, along with the rest of the world community, might be able to bring to the problem. Well, I've never seen anything like this before. I've certainly never seen it up close. The experience of walking down, feeling it rattle and shake from under you, the thunder building up as you get closer to it, and then the tremendous heat. I suppose we were 50 feet away from a well that I'm told is 2,300 degrees at the center. It's a kind of environmental history that's been made here. Not a good environmental history, but it's been made, and we're concerned to try to do what we can to help Kuwait, just as we helped win the war, help win the peace. The environment's a very important part of that.
Early fears about disastrous effects on the monsoons and other global weather systems have so far proved exaggerated. But what if the fires refuse to die? Already, the citizens of Kuwait have felt the calamitous effects of living beneath poison clouds, with the threat of future illnesses as they breathed in the mixture of soot and unburnt oil.
The study we did in the beginning of April showed that about 60% of the people in 8 areas are suffering from difficulty in breathing and eye allergies and skin rashes and headaches and psychological effects. This all could show within 2 years at least, and if we are talking about cancer, the latency period is more than 10 years. So we are thinking about the new generation.
In August, scientists were making computer predictions on the expectation that the fires would burn for a year or even 2. At the Harvard School of Public Health, a scientific conference considered some alarming possibilities.
Depends on the mass loadings that you would get on a particular sample. You'd have to sometimes monitor.
We've looked at 3 scenarios that would have the wells out in 1, 2, and 3 years into the future from the time that the wells started burning. When I look at the surface of the Earth, 4,000 kilometers or 5,000 kilometers on a side, and look at the potential impact in terms of destruction of plants, human health impacts over an area that large, my reaction is that's rather dramatic.
The fallout from the fires, not only soot, but sulfur, acid rain, and poisonous heavy metals, could affect agriculture and the people dependent on it over vast areas of the globe.
And we're looking at the total accumulated soot after 18 months projected to be on the ground due to the wildfires. You see 2 areas of concentration. One is centered over Kuwait, with a large deposition to the north, as well as an area of increased deposition over Thailand.
The stakes were high for the people of Kuwait, for millions in the region, and for the increasingly exhausted firefighting teams. At well 120, the battle against the fire intensifies, this time with 400 pounds of dynamite. It fails. In August, each firefighting company brings a third extra team to Kuwait. The work speeds up. Also, after intervention by the Crown Prince, the haggling over commissions and agency fees in Kuwait is resolved. The long-delayed machinery and equipment floods in. The number of wells capped rises to 6 a day as the fires give way under the onslaught of money and resources. The impact is obvious. In the Brigand, where fires were so close together it was impossible to count them, the horizon is clear and only a handful of fires remain. The firefighters themselves are surprised by the speed at which they work.
We could see some progress being made at that time. You know, that we're getting things down more or less into a system. The support was a lot better. We were able to have water, which we didn't have initially.
And everything started falling together. The transportation got better. The amount of equipment coming in got better, and just the logistics. It's just totally a new world. If this lake of oil would have ignited, we would have been here for I don't know how long trying to put out the lake fire to get to the well. As it turned out, everything fell in our direction, and we got this one well in one day. It looks like a totally different country from what I saw when I got here 60 days. It's strange to say, but every well was similar. When we'd go from one well to the other, we learned from the last well we was on would help us on the next well. And as we went, we got smarter.
In September, other firefighting teams joined the veterans from North America. This well is being tackled by men from Kuwait. At first, their attempts to douse the flames end in failure. But then, in a second attempt, they succeed, and black oil flows instead of sheets of fire. The Kuwait firefighters eventually put out 41 fires. Other wells are being tackled by teams from half a dozen countries. The Hungarian team attracts much media attention with its exotic Master Blaster, a bizarre contraption made from 2 jet engines mounted on an old tank chassis, blasting atomized water into the fire at 600 miles an hour. They extinguished 5 fires. Even the Russians are here, and they blame their late arrival on Kuwait bureaucracy.
We were invited in May, but we only actually arrived here in September. I don't know what the situation is with the other teams.
We felt that we should invite
these countries, of course, which have the experience in the firefighting, and quickly they respond, and we negotiated quickly.
Everything was so disorganized and there was so much bureaucracy. We were ready to come in May, but when we finally arrived at our jobs, we realized that it would all soon be over. We started our work on the 16th, and we have put out 4 so far. Yes, this is our last well.
In the 2 oil fields to the north of Kuwait, just a few fires remain, and bare desert stretches to the far horizon. In many cases, the firefighters have overestimated the damage caused to the wells by the uncontrolled flow of oil and gas.
We thought that, particularly in the case of certain Marat gas wells, the Rotatane wells, that we would find that prolonged exposure to open flow would have created lots more erosion problems than it did, and it did not. We thought that the type of charges that were being set off would create some mechanical problems within the wellbore that they did not. These were all overestimations on our part. The wells simply were not as difficult to deal with as we believed before we had any real history of dealing with them.
In October, the fires were put out at a faster and faster rate. Well after well was extinguished and capped. Even well 120 was tamed by the application of much more powerful explosives and the flow of oil contained. And incredible effort had succeeded in doing a job that people originally had predicted would take perhaps 2 years. It had taken just 8 months. Children now play in the clean streets of Ahmadi, and normality is beginning to return to Kuwait and its oil industry. The predictions of global catastrophe and climatic change were not borne out. But in the 8 months that these fires burned, massive oil lakes formed over the desert. There they continue to lie, releasing deadly gases that pollute the air. Whatever efforts are made to restore the desert sands, they will remain black and oil-stained. Many had said that the only people who would benefit from this catastrophe were the firefighters, that they would take their time on a job they saw as a huge moneymaker.
At least in the case of wild well control, we at first proposed on a well-by-well basis, and it was rejected in favor of a daily rate framework, which in the end is what was negotiated with each of these companies. And as far as Wild Well is concerned, we would have just as soon had it on a well-by-well basis. I think it shows the astute powers of the Kuwaitis to have decided on a daily rate.
The Hellfires of Kuwait were the biggest challenge ever posed to the firefighters of the oil industry. The last fires were extinguished in early November 1991. For the men who did the job, it's time to go.
Everyone here is a bit tired, ready to go, ready to see the project end on the one hand, and on the other hand, have some reservations about it. And certainly some among us, if we could just keep it going, would do so. I have no doubt about it.
Why is that?
I suppose it's like the baker or the chef. If it's what you do and you like to do it, and you hate to see the project end.
It's been a tremendous project. one that we'll never see again in their life. And we've enjoyed it for the most part. And like I say, all of our guys have gone through, scot-free with no injuries, and which is really important.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's not a well over here worth one man's life. That's the bottom dollar.
We have no idea. When the phone rings, we'll go.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. And Lockheed, a bold new force in systems engineering, management, and technology services for defense, space, and industry. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.